Welcome to the Real Board Loft. I'm Trip Forman. We have Devon Howard with us. Devon, welcome.
Yeah.
And we are here to talk with you about the Channel Islands Big Happy. It's their new Big Guy shortboard, performance shortboard.
Yep.
And Devon, take it away. Let's talk Big Happy.
Yeah, so we've got, an aging demographic, if you will. We've got a lot of surfers out there who have enjoyed CI boards forever, and they're at a point in their life where, for different reasons, they need a little bit more foam. But they're not ready to jump to, let's say, a mid-length or a longboard or even what we call a hybrid, which would be like our M23. I think the reason that this is still considered a shortboard is clearly because of the outline. And even though you're holding a 6'8", I've got a 6'10", these still, if we look on the bottom of the board, they still have a lot of shortboard features, which is the bottom design. Mm-hmm. I think one of the key features that keeps it in the shortboard realm is this single concave entry. And then it goes into a double in the back. And for anyone that knows about shortboards, that's a really common, a really popular design, especially in a lot of our models that we have. Mm-hmm. And that design is about kind of maximum speed down the line. And the way you get that speed is you have to generate it. So you're pumping the board. I think this is not a board for someone that wants to sort of cruise. Like, hey, things are slowing down. I can't shortboard as well as I used to. I need something that's going to be easier, and I just want to kind of cruise and trim. This may not be the board for you because of this design. You may want to jump to maybe an M23, which is a hybrid design that's got more of a flat bottom, or perhaps a mid-length. But if shortboard's where you're at and you're not ready to jump to that, you'll dig this because it keeps you in the shortboard realm. Now, there's a couple ways to size it. These are clearly some of the bigger ones. So like, you and I are a little bit bigger guys. You know, if you're in that 6 foot and over 190 plus, a lot of people are riding in that 6'6" to 6'8" range. Mm-hmm. If you're like a really bigger frame person, like a guy who's like 250, and you really want a shortboard still, you're probably looking at that 6'8" to 6'10" range. If you're a bigger guy but still surfing quite well, let's say like a Peter Mel would be a good example. Mm-hmm. If you look at the video that Britt and Peter did to describe this board, it's a good reference. Peter and Britt are riding 6'4".
Okay.
And these guys are taller, but their fitness is still pretty good, and they still want a really short board. And I think it's a good reference if you look at the video of Peter and Britt to give a sense. I think Peter's 6'3" or 6'4", maybe, I can't quite remember, and Britt is 6'6". And so,
and that's a stock 6'4", or is that like kind of altered dimensions, like custom?
I believe they're stock dimensions.
Okay.
Britt really designed the board for himself and where he's at, and Britt is very performance surfing oriented, and so I think if you're in that lane, that's kind of the perfect board for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, both those guys rip. I was actually able to watch a lot of Britt's heats in the Rincon Classic.
Oh yeah.
And it's obvious like why he doesn't want to have it, why he wants to continue to develop a board like this, especially for himself. Let's talk about the design and what's different about the design rather than just throwing more foam at it, right? Because there's a ton of like big guy tries out there that in a lot of times fall short in performance. Right. It sort of feels like once you go past like a performance 6'2" or 3, like the performance just goes out the window when you throw additional foam at it.
Sure.
But there's something different about this board. It's not like per size, it's not super sized in volume. It's a little bit more volume, but there's changes in the design compared to like, let's say a standard Happy. Like what is Britt share with that?
Well, let's go there, but let me back up just a hair. This is part of a broader family of a board, which I think is helpful to understand. So we have we call it the Happy family, and it sounds like a little bit of a silly name, but it's fun for us. So you have, starting at like the Happy Everyday.
Right.
So that's typically like your step down groveler. We have the 2 Happy, which is a pretty progressive rocker, but it's a lower rocker than the Pro Series. Mm-hmm. And then we have the Happy Traveler, which is typically like a step up type of board for most people. And this board is a bit of an offshoot so those have a familiar rocker profile. Britt designed those boards so that you could jump from any one of those boards and it feels very familiar.
Okay.
It's not a huge swing either way. So this board would be close to the Happy Traveler. And the tail's been condensed a little bit, but what he did what's different from the Traveler is you put a little bit more foam right here under the chest.
Okay.
He wanted to hide the foam. As he'll tell you, he's like, hey, I'm getting older, I'm not as fit as I used to be, and it's hard for him to compete and catch waves against the lineups are more crowded today.
Yeah.
So he was able to keep a little bit more foam here, just a tiny bit more width than the Traveler, but not by much. He just really wanted to maintain the bottom and not sacrifice performance by flattening out the bottom so that you could trim out on the board.
Okay.
So it's not a giant difference. It's really close to the Happy family, and I think it's important to note that, because if you've already been in that zone, it's not going to be a big jump for you.
It'll be a familiar transition from any of the Happies over to this.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And they all play off one another. I think it really just the big question for people is going to be, how do I size it? You know,
right,
I think that depends where you're at. And if you use Britt and Peter as a reference, gauge your surfing off what those guys are doing, and you'll see that they're riding 6.4s. If you're not at that level, we're recommending to people they maybe go 2 or 3 inches more to just accommodate that need for the extra paddle.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned like 250, 250 pounds, right? Because it used to be like 200 pounds was a gigantic surfer, since most pros are like 145 to 160, and people would judge like 200 pounds as, oh my gosh, you're like extra large. But we have customers come in all the time that are like 250, 280, and that can surf well. A lot of them come from other sporting backgrounds, like where their whole life they've just been trying to get big, or they were born that big. Yeah. And but they also want to surf, and then some of them want to surf shortboards, and so it's interesting to see this thing, not only cover what Britt and Peter want to surf, but also like those bigger guys, like the actual football linebackers, or the big guys that are going to look at this board like in a 7.2 or a 7.4. Sure.
Yeah, and so it is interesting. I think that's the thing to pay attention, like I was saying, is just figuring out how to size it. And then we also, I'm holding another technology we have, which is interesting. So at CI, we've got the PU, the traditional build, which you're holding. We have the Spine Tech, which it's not stocked in Spine Tech, I don't think. I could be wrong unless you ordered it that way. And then we have the ECT, which is stands for Eco Carbon Tech. And what it simply is it's a pulverized carbon powder. It's a recycled, actually. We get it post-industrial use before it goes into a landfill. We're able to grab it, we grind it. And what the team has found is that you get a little bit more life out of the board, a little bit more of a vibrancy and feel. When the waves are a little bit better and bigger, it dampens the chop. Okay. Baron Mamiya's been, if you look, he's been riding them in Hawaii, he's been riding them in Big Indo, which was a total surprise to us. We thought this was going to be a small wave performance technology, just to add a little bit more zing and pop to your surfing. But we found that it also works in bigger waves. And so what you get out of the ECT, you get sort of a stronger, livelier board. But what's cool about it is it feels familiar. It's not a carbon wrap. So a carbon wrap, they're really strong and they don't dent at all. These still dent like a normal board does, so it feels familiar. But it is a little bit stronger, and it dampens. The key thing that we found is it dampens the surface chatter. What's the blank on ECT? Is it PU or EPS? You can get whatever you want. So it'll tell you on the board. So this one right here says poly on it. So this is, I don't know if this is US blanks or Arctic foam. I'd have to check on what we use in this particular model. We usually use the foam that lines up with the design. And also to make sure, because every foam manufacturer will offer different rocker profiles and distribution of the foam. So we can confirm what that is. But regardless of who made the blank, it is a PU board. So this is a traditional build, basically what you have, but it has the carbon powder added. If you want to get an epoxy board, you can order it that way, and it will say it right here. So there's no confusion. You just have to look on the ECT logo, and it'll tell you what construction. I think the majority of our pros, when the waves are small, have been getting the epoxy just to get a little bit more life in the small stuff for contests. A lot of your more traditional surfers that have been around for a long time used to PU are sticking with PU because they like the feeling of that. This just gives them a little added zing. It was interesting listening to you talk about Britt and him developing this board for himself at RingCon, and you touched specifically like on
the paddle, like wave catching and the competition, like in the lineup, because that is an intense lineup.
Sure.
Especially when there's good waves, and especially like in the cove section of the wave, like that takeoff point is crazy competitive. And it in some of the other videos, like the mid and the mid twin, we talked about like how cool it is to have like a test track like Rincon like right down the hill from you. But specifically the test track on this board obviously is surfing it, but when you're talking about a surfer transitioning from some of the other Happy boards into the big Happy, that's, I would think, one of the biggest things on their mind, right? Is the paddle, the competition in the lineup and the ability to get waves in a competitive lineup, and there is no better test track than that. Than Rincon for sure.
Yeah, and that was, if you listen to Britt speak to the board, that was one of the key features was how can he hide more foam, and that's something that Peter Mel appreciated. He really noticed where the foam was hidden up here in the chest, and that makes all the difference right there, because more foam back here isn't necessarily going to help you paddle better. Maybe if it's a little bit wider tail block, but you need it right up under there. And yeah, I think they've nailed it. So did a good job.
That's interesting that Pete's still riding a 6'4" as well, because that's like kind of been his go-to size all the way back to JC.
Yeah, and you're getting more lift out of the board, so that offsets the need for going too big with this board.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome, Devon. Hey, thank you so much. It's the Channel Islands Big Happy. If any of you out there have any questions on the Big Happy or would like to order one for yourself, either custom or stock, you can always reach us at the shop, 252-987-6000, or look us up online, realwatersports.com/surfing. Thanks for tuning in.